Hey everybody, this is All Source News, or also known as Stefano Rittendale, and in this video, this is a request from one of my viewers. Wanted to know the latest situation in the state of Chihuahua, specifically along the violence in Ojinaga. This is something that I have covered extensively on my Twitter account or X account, and here I'll just give a quick video that kind of lays out the situation in Chihuahua, Ojinaga, Juarez, and how that kind of impacts into El Paso as well and other border regions, and kind of the significant importance of this region in the area and why cartels are actively fighting for control here. And so, just as always, when we'll start with the map, and here you can see the state of Chihuahua. And then this green, it's important to highlight that this belongs to a cartel called the Nuevo Cartel de Juarez, or the New Juarez Cartel, also called La Linea. And, a lot of people are going to kind of go into historic examples. La Linea used to be an armed gang, the old Juarez Cartel. But for all intents and purposes nowadays, La Linea is the kind of now the new cartel in Juarez, right? They kind of became the new Juarez cartel from being kind of the armed enforcers to now the main group. And you can call them La Linea, you can call them the new cartel of Juarez, or Nuevo Cartel de Juarez, or even just the Juarez cartel to simplify it. But as you can see in the area highlighted in green, I mean, they have a very important presence in Chihuahua and a significant amount of territorial control in the state. And the Juarez cartel is what we would consider one of these border cartels, right? And just as, let's say, the Northeast cartel or the different factions of the Gulf cartel, like the Metros and the Scorpion group, the Juarez cartel really doesn't control much territory where they can manufacture their own drugs. And as such, they rely on other cartels to push products to them, specifically either drugs or migrants or any other product, so that can get smuggled into the United States. Now, the Juarez cartel La Linea historically has an alliance with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, right? La Linea and the Juarez cartel have this alliance, and where the Jalisco New Generation pushes product from their territories further deeper into Mexico to Chihuahua for then the Juarez cartel to then pass that on and smuggle it into the United States. So that CG&G Juarez cartel alliance is very important and enables the Juarez cartel to make sure they have financial stability and a significant source of income, because then they're the ones responsible for pushing that into the United States. Now the Juarez cartel, or La Linea, historically has had a lot of fighting with different groups. Until the Chapitos CG&G alliance was announced, as down here, right in Sinaloa, the Chapitos used to fight against La Linea, or the Juarez cartel. They used to have regular fighting, but once the Chapitos announced the strategic alliance with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, shortly afterwards, there was reporting that those Chapitos and La Linea entered into a ceasefire agreement, right? And so that violence has really subsided, at least between both groups. And there's even conversations that is El Nuevo Cartel de Juarez the new cartel that's going to join this Chapito CG&G alliance. So far, we haven't really seen actual confirmation of that, just that La Linea CG&G has a strategic alliance, an important alliance, and then Los Chapitos have a ceasefire with La Linea. Along western Chihuahua, here in the Orion Sonora, I kind of briefly touched upon this on my Sinaloa video, but we have factions that broke off from Los Chapitos in 2023, and they called themselves loosely a confederation of a Cartel Independiente de Sonora, or the Independent Cartel of Sonora, right? In reality, there are various groups, specifically Los Salazars, Los Paredes, Cazadores Fantasmas, who historically belonged to the Chapitos before they broke off and started to fight against Los Chapitos in Sonora. And so that break-off that has a lot of violence between Chapito-aligned groups in Sonora and these new groups, those groups still fight against La Linea and along the Sonora-Chihuahua border area. Specifically, one of the main groups in Sonora that fights against La Linea is this one, Los Salazars. We used to do a lot of violence, and that kind of also happens in areas along southern Chihuahua, and you can see down here. So that's kind of a lot of the violence in this area between Los Salazars and El Nuevo Cartel de Juarez, La Linea, right? So that is the main one. But I think the reason why the person was commenting in my YouTube video, why he wanted this covered, is something that I think is much more important when we're analyzing Chihuahua. And that's the situation right here in Ojinaga, which is in kind of, I guess, northeastern Chihuahua. This is a major offensive that is going on. And as you can see, I highlighted in purple what's the group there, and that's Los Maito Flacos. Los Maito Flacos, for months now, have really been pressing an offensive against Nuevo Cartel de Juarez, centered around the border town of Ojinaga. And that violence has continued and continued. Now, who actually controls Ojinaga? I mean, it's kind of hard to say. It's up for debate. Obviously, if you talk to people aligned to Maito Flaco, they say they control it. People from La Linea say that they're under control in Ojinaga. But I think it's pretty fair to state that in Ojinaga specifically, I mean, the Maito Flacos do have at least somewhat of an upper hand, and they have the most to gain. And the violence between los Maito Flacos and el Nuevo Cartel de Juarez is also along kind of these southern regions, as shown here, of Chihuahua. And these kind of areas around here, we can also see a lot of the territorial control that occurs here. A lot of the violence between los Maito Flacos and el Nuevo Cartel de Juarez also happened in the southern area. But the main focus and the main push continues to be Ojinaga. And I'll see if I can zoom in just a little bit. I think the focus for Maito Flaco and the reason why he wants Ojinaga is because this would give him a major border town. Maybe not major, that's kind of a loose term, but an important border town where he can now continue his own smuggling operations, right, into the United States. And so that's why a lot of the violence is centered around here. And again, this is Ojinaga, that right there right at the border with the United States. And a lot of the violence that we see is here. And this is a key area that we're seeing. And so that is something to kind of importantly highlight. And so, La Linea, who is the predominant player in Chihuahua, is fighting multiple different groups, Los Salazares in Sonora and Los Maito Flacos along southern Chihuahua and along Ojinaga. I think that's why their ceasefire with Los Chapitos is beneficial to La Linea, and that's why they want to maintain it. And then the question then obviously becomes, does La Linea take the next step and become part of this Chapito CG&G strategic alliance? And we'll see. I think there's a lot of rumors that it's already happened. I wouldn't be surprised if it's already in place. To be honest, if I were to speculate and you were to ask me, is La Linea part of the strategic alliance? I'd probably say yes in some way, shape, or form. But, there's not a definitive video like we have or definitive proof like in other cases between the Chapitos and CG&G. We're just kind of lacking that. But I think it's safe to assume they're probably a little bit more in bed between both cartels. And it's also a situation where the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I mean, Los Chapitos fight against Los Salazars. Los Chapitos fight against Maito Flaco. Jalisco New Generation fight against Maito Flaco. La Linea, those are the two main groups they're fighting. It just makes sense why La Linea might as well join the strategic alliance or have some shape or form involvement in the strategic alliance. I'll just quickly zoom in to Ciudad Juarez, because Ciudad Juarez, obviously with El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juarez is the base of operation for the Nuevo Cartel de Juarez. This is where they have a predominant amount of presence. In Ciudad Juarez, there are Chapitos and Sinaloa groups active there. And some of the violence that we've seen in Ciudad Juarez can be tied into specific violence also related to the Sinaloa cartel presence in Ciudad Juarez. But overall, Ciudad Juarez is predominantly controlled by El Nuevo Cartel de Juarez, and the Sinaloa cartel has a smaller presence there. And even there were, last year or 2 years ago, there was even splits within the Sinaloa cartel inside of the Ciudad Juarez, prison riots, etc., that happened there. And that was more directly tied because of internal splits within the Sinaloa cartel before the Civil War happened in the Sinaloa cartel. That's those internal groups inside the Juarez and the violence there was because of that Sinaloa cartel split, again, before the Civil War. But one of the things I think is very important to highlight, because a lot of people think of Ciudad Juarez, they think of El Paso, and they think of the migrants being smuggled in or trying to cross over. And I think a lot of the issues that people run into is they automatically assume that every single human smuggling operation that happens in Ciudad Juarez to El Paso is directly tied to La Linea, and I would not make that jump. Yes, La Linea is a major player in human smuggling operations, but a lot of the groups that operate in Ciudad Juarez are what we would consider alien smuggling operations or ASOs. These are local and even sometimes family criminal groups that operate in Ciudad Juarez, and they do a lot of these smuggling operations outside of the direct oversight or control of Ciudad Juarez. And so, what these ASOs do is they might pay a fee to the Juarez cartel to be able to operate in that plaza uninterrupted. And the Juarez cartel kind of maybe takes a little bit more of a step back. Now, I would say La Linea and the Juarez cartels, if you analyze all the cartels, do have a much more involvement in human smuggling. But I just want to make sure you understand that it's not all the human smuggling that happens in Juarez is directly tied to the Juarez cartel. A lot of it is these alien smuggling organizations or ASOs, these local and family crime groups that operate in this state, in this city, and they're the ones that do a lot of the smuggling, and they pay a plaza fee. And even sometimes inside of Ciudad Juarez, when we see assassinations and violence, a lot of times it can be explained more logically by these local gangs or criminal groups fighting each other in Ciudad Juarez, not necessarily the Juarez cartel as a whole fighting a rival or a different group. You can actually see it more from these local groups fighting each other to control human smuggling into El Paso, much more so in the outer picture. And I haven't even touched upon the many gangs that operate across El Paso and the Ciudad Juarez, like Barrio Azteca, for example, these outlaw motorcycle gangs in El Paso, and a lot of these other local gangs that operate on both sides of the border that also can kind of explain the violence. But again, the Juarez cartel is clearly the top dog in Ciudad Juarez. Then you would have all these local criminal groups, either human smuggling focused or just local gangs. Like I said, Barrio Azteca is a perfect example. And then further down, and although the Sinaloa cartel does have a significant presence in the Ciudad Juarez, I wouldn't consider them the top player there, and that still is for the Juarez cartel. So again, this is probably a little bit of a simpler video in Chihuahua compared to my other ones. I did want to honor the request from the commentator who requested the specific video. I know he was specifically focused on Ojinaga. As I mentioned, it's kind of hard to tell who actually controls Ojinaga at the moment. I'm more inclined to say La Linea does, but I do believe the Mallito Flacos are pressing their offensive, and they slightly had the upper hand. So this is another one of the many conflicts that are impacting Mexico right now within the cartel wars. And this is something I'm going to continue to monitor because it is an important development, and it shows various groups that can then tie into a bigger picture. As I alluded to, what is the role that La Linea will have within the Chapitos and CG&G strategic alliance, if there even will be a role for La Linea? How does Mallito Flaco take advantage of this? And I think this is an important area that needs a lot of focus, and I think a lot of people are more looking at other conflicts, for example, the Sinaloa cartel civil war. But again, with that, thank you so much for joining me in this episode. I really hope you like it. Please comment below. Let me know what is the next video you want me to cover. What is the next area you want me to cover? There's a lot of violence that is impacting Mexico at the moment. So please let me know what you think, and thank you again for your time.